So this morning's message is called Never Abandoned, Never Forsaken. And I was, the story of the prodigal son just kept coming to mind. And I thought just some thoughts that we're going to share as we look at that story. In Deuteronomy, though, first chapter 31, verse 6, Moses reminds God's people of God's promise that he will never fail you nor abandon you. That God will never fail you nor abandon you. And how many of you are thankful for that? Because how many of you have failed God? How many of you have abandoned God at times? There are times where I felt like God had abandoned me, and I'm like, God, where are you? And God's like, I'm right here. Where are you? It's us that walks away from God. God doesn't walk away from us. And as we're going to see this morning, as we look at this story, that even when we walk away from God, He never forsakes us. He never abandons. How many we all have different experiences with earthly fathers, some good, some non-existent, some bad. But there's the reality that in this world, sometimes family will disown one another. Friends will disown one another. Something will happen and they'll say, I want nothing to do with you ever again. I'm taking my name away from you. And as we'll see this morning, that we are heirs to the kingdom of God. We are heirs to God, our Heavenly Father. And He never once says, I forsake you. We're looking at this idea that because of God's faithfulness isn't a byproduct of our faithfulness. Rather, our faithfulness to God should be in response to His faithfulness to us. So our big idea this morning is God never disinherits or disowns His children. Don't die in the pig pen. Go live in your Father's house. So we're going to be looking at Luke chapter 15. So I'm going to read the first part of 15 here. And Jesus was telling a few parables that capture the heart. The Pharisees didn't like the idea that Jesus was with all of these people that they would have forsaken, that they wanted to disassociate with. The tax collectors, the sinners, and the people with occupations we won't say because of children in the room. But let's look at Luke chapter 15, verse 1. Tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. This made the Pharisees and teachers of religious law complain that He was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. Oh my goodness. They were walking by and they looked and they could see in the window of Applebee's that Jesus was in there sitting with some of the worst sinners in their community. They saw Him sitting. He might have even been sitting at the bar next to a local drug dealer. We don't know. And they were like, what is He doing? What if people get the wrong impression of Him? They didn't like that He was with the tax collectors who were basically stealing from their own people and giving it to the Romans, their oppressors. Verse 3, so Jesus told them this story. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others in the open fields or in the wilderness to go search for the one lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. And when he arrives, he will call together his friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me because I have found my lost sheep. In the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't yet strayed away. And then he goes on to say, or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Now that's a lot of money. Imagine if you lost a tenth of your year's wage, or maybe several years. Like you lost a tenth of your savings in one go. I would be freaking out a little bit. So imagine a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Won't she light a lamp and sweep the entire house and search carefully until she finds it? I love this idea. I mean, think about it. This is a picture of what Jesus was doing. He was going into the dark corners of his society, and he was sweeping people out looking for the lost. Carefully until she finds it. And when she finds it, she will call in her friends and neighbors and said, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost coin. I have found my lost treasure." And in the same way, there is joy in the presence of God's angels when even one sinner repents. And then to illustrate the point further, verse 11, Jesus told them this story. And a man had 2 sons. And the younger son told his father, "I want my share of your estate." Think about that. So as earthly people, how would you respond to that? If you've worked hard your whole life, you've got everything that you own, and your child comes to you and says, "Give me mine of yours." Wouldn't probably be too happy with that attitude. "I want my share of your estate now before you die." So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. The son was a picture of us. How many times we can be quite greedy? We want everything. We want it now. And that attitude of it, everything in this world, it is mine, and it can lead us off into sin, is what happens with this son. So a few days later, this younger son, he packs up all his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all his money in wild living. I think it's easy to get a picture of this, maybe this Wisconsin farm kid, and he gets his inheritance and he flies out to Las Vegas. You do the montage and partying, and he's got all these new friends all of a sudden. There's women on his arms, and there's expensive cars, and he thinks he's having a great time. Next thing you know, the lights are spinning, and he's dazed and confused, and he wakes up, and his credit card's declined. All the money's gone. And when the last of the drugs and the drinks are gone, his friends began to leave too. Verse 14, about this time his money ran out. A great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his field to feed the pigs. So, just to stop there, as Jesus is telling this story, so there's some shocking things with this young man. At this point, this probably would have been the most disturbing part to the Pharisees. Pigs were unclean. You don't do that. You don't touch it. And so for this young man to have come from this wealthy Jewish home to now be in a field working with the pigs, he has hit the lowest of the lows. Like there's the gutter, and there's where this kid is now. He sent him into fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods that he was feeding the pigs looked good to him. So the food, the waste that was not good enough for human consumption that they would feed to the pigs, this began to look good to him. The young man became so hungry, even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. No one's like, "Oh, kid, don't do that. Here, have some bread, have some water." They're like, ugh. And what an interesting picture. Like, when he had all that wealth, when he had all that money, yeah, the world was there to give him whatever he wanted at a cost. But the world was not going to give him what he needed. The world was not going to give him what he needed. The world was going to leave him with the pigs, with nothing but slop. Verse 17, when he finally came to his senses. If you have those moments in your life where you don't realize you've wandered away, you're in the moment, and all of a sudden you wake up and you're like, what am I doing? Why am I being so stupid? What have I... This is not better than what God had for me. This is leaving me at the point of death almost. I love it. It said, and he was dying of hunger. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare. And here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. He was having this awareness, this awakening, and was he correct in his thinking that he was no longer worthy to be called this man's son? Yeah, by the world's standards, by his actions, he was living far beneath what he was taught and raised to do. He was living far beneath his status and his privilege. He not only had shamed his father, but he took what was his father's, took it away, and used that to shame his family. And so he was right in that assumption that he didn't deserve to be taken back. And so in his mind, he's like, well, maybe I can at least work. At least I can be in his house. At least I can be under his protection. At least I can have what his servants have. So risking shame, risking rejection, he returned home to his father. But something tells me he had lived underneath his father's house before. That he knew something about his father that he was willing to risk going back. So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, and this is one of my favorite pictures. Imagine this long, winding, dusty road. You got these wheat fields. You got people out working, and perhaps the father's, just in my imagination here, I see this home sitting up on this hill. And in my mind, if this were me, I'd every day be praying and looking out down that road that my child would be returning. Verse 20, so he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son. And just that contrast, and this is a picture of God, just this contrast of God's passion and love for us. How many times when we've been hurt, when we've been wronged, we say, no, you're going to walk the whole way to me. In fact, we might say, here's some hurdles you got to jump over. No, you know what? You stink. You stop out there, let the servants hose you off, clean you off, then you come to me. When you get your stuff together, when you get things sorted out, then you come back. What we see here is while he was still far away off, he wasn't all the way home yet. And the father ran to him to meet him where he was and to welcome and bring him back. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son. He embraced him and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you. I am no longer worthy of being called your son. But his father said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet. And part of that picture of the ring, there was often a family insignia, a ring that signified who you belonged to. And I'm sure that young man, if he had one before, it was lost, gambled away long ago. And it was most likely the father's own coat that would have been the nicest coat. He said, put the finest coat. Put the ring with my name on his finger. Kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. For the son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. And I love this next part. So the party began. So the party began. And I think sometimes we think that God is just taking us back, just, come on. There is a party when a soul comes back. What a person in this world who has been lost and has not yet maybe even known that there's a Father willing to adopt them, to bring them home. And when they discover that God is willing to take them in and to be the one to cleanse them. He didn't say, son, get your act together, then come into my house. He said, you come into my house, I will clean you. And so the party began. I mean, if we could imagine those moments in our lives where we were wandering away from God, perhaps, or we were in those moments where we were dying in the pig pen. And some of us, it was more metaphorically, maybe spiritually and emotionally, we were dying in our sin, in the things of life. And for some of us, maybe it was literally, we were literally dying in this world. And that moment we come to our senses, that moment we realize everything we need is at home in our Father's house and is not out in the world. The moment we understand that, and the moment we go back to Him, that is the moment He sees us from afar. He runs to us, brings us back. He cleanses us, makes us new. He's never forsaken us. And in that moment, there is a shout throughout the cosmos, the heavens shaking with angels blowing trumpets and the clatter of those before us, maybe loved ones who have gone on before us, that great cloud of witnesses. There's a celebration. Maybe there's like I don't know, this is just me, there's a big sign that goes, somebody, so-and-so's back. We've got them. They've been rescued. That how important must we be to God that all of heaven celebrates when we are with Him. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house. And he asked one of the servants, "What is going on?" "Your brother is back," he was told. "And your father has killed the fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return." The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him. But he replied, "All these years I have slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. And then all the time you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back," I love this, he doesn't even call him his brother. He doesn't say, "Well, my brother." He still hasn't accepted his brother yet. He says, "Your son. When the son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fatted calf." And his father said to him, and I imagine with that same love and compassion that welcomed back that son, he looked into this son's eyes and said, "Look, dear son, you have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours." We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. And I want us to get a clear picture this morning that our Father does not forsake us. He does not abandon us. From the perspective of the oldest son, he remained faithful. He had never left his father's house. And this is kind of hitting to the heart of the Pharisees. They had stayed trying to keep God's rules. And some of the Pharisees get a bad rap, but to be fair to them, they were trying to stay in God's house. Their motives may not always have been pure. And although this oldest son had remained faithful and never left his father's house, Perhaps he'd allowed his pride to cloud his heart and mind, the pride of, look what I have done for my father. And perhaps this oldest son, one of the reasons he was so angry is he was looking at all of this in terms of being earned in reward, in the sense that I have earned my father's inheritance. I have earned my place in my father's house, and my brother has not earned it. And what the father is saying to him, he's like, this has all been yours all along. The father's basically saying, there was nothing to stop you from taking a goat and celebrating. I would have liked you to have celebrated. Celebrate that you are in my house. Celebrate that you are in my goodness. Imagine if this oldest son, had that perspective, but perhaps that pride and of the dignity of trying to earn it, not realizing he can't earn what his father has. His father has already given it to him. And if he had had that perspective, that he would have been living a life of celebration, celebrating that I am in my father's house, not begrudgingly like, I'm in my father's house, I'm doing the good thing while he's out having a good time. Instead, he should have been at the point where like, this is where it's at. This is where the party's at. This is where the blessing is. This is where I deserve to be. Thank you that I have this opportunity, and celebrate and say, friends, look, this is my father's house, and this is what I love. I mean, remember the old Audio Adrenaline song, Father's House? It's a big, big house. There's lots and lots of room. With a big, big yard, we can play football in, table with lots and lots of food. It was a fun little song. But Jesus kind of hits on this, actually. In John chapter 14, verse 3, don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, and trust also in me. There is more than enough room in my Father's home. If this were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready, I will come and get you, so that you will always be with me where I am. And you know the way to where I am going. It's talking about the presence of God. That reward of being with God, everything we need is in Him. And we know the way because we see Christ, and God was in Christ, and Christ was in God. And everything that Christ had came from the Father above. All His power, everything was His. Think about it. God said to His Son, this is my Son with whom I am well pleased. It's all His. All of creation is His. And then Jesus is saying, you are mine. Everything I have is yours. A restoration of what we saw was lost in Genesis when mankind, and God says, I've created it. It's all yours. Be with me in this. And we screwed it up and we made a wreck of it. And Jesus comes back and says, I'm going to fix it. Be in me, and this is all yours. So as we look at Christ, as we follow Him, as we are with Him, we are in the Father's house. And there is room for everyone. If you're listening, if you're here this morning, don't ever think, I've screwed up so bad, there's no more room for me. There's not a bouncer who's going to look at you and go, I don't like what you're wearing. Nope, we're full. So this morning's big idea, as we wrap up, God never disinherits or disowns His children. So run to Him. Don't leave Him. And if you find that you have wandered, if you come to your senses and realize, I have wandered from where I'm supposed to be, I have wandered away from Him, run back to Him. He will run and meet you and bring you back and welcome you back. And the reason that is so important is there's this tension. The Father never disinherited. He never forsake His Son. But His Son, the reality is, could have died with the pigs outside of His Father's house. Don't die with the pigs outside the Father's house. Don't die in the pig pen. Live in the Father's house.